Size. Growing up in my family always felt like I was trying to earn a place that should have already been mine. On the outside, we looked like a normal, successful family. My parents lived in a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. My siblings had impressive careers, and family gatherings were full of smiling photos and polite laughter. But beneath all of that, there was an unspoken ranking system that everyone seemed to understand, except me when I was younger. My older brother, Daniel, had always been the pride of the family. He was confident, ambitious, and successful in a way that my parents loved to brag about. By the time he was 30, he already owned 2 investment properties and drove a luxury car that my father never failed to mention during conversations with relatives. Every time Daniel visited, it felt like an event. My mom would cook his favorite meals, my dad would pour expensive drinks, and the whole evening would somehow revolve around his achievements. My younger sister, Lily, had a different kind of spotlight. She wasn't necessarily the most responsible person, but she was charming, beautiful, and naturally good at getting attention. My parents adored her in a softer, more protective way. Whenever Lily talked about her plans, traveling with her boyfriend, shopping for designer clothes, or moving into a trendy apartment, my parents listened like she was describing something admirable. And then there was me. I was the middle child, the one who always tried to keep the peace. I didn't have flashy accomplishments or dramatic stories to share at dinner. I worked as a graphic designer, which I genuinely loved, but to my parents it sounded more like a hobby than a career. My job paid well enough for me and my husband to live comfortably, but it didn't come with the kind of prestige that made my parents proud. Family dinners had a predictable rhythm to them. Someone would bring up Daniel's newest business deal, and my father would beam with pride as if he had personally negotiated the contract. Then Lily would talk about her latest trip or shopping spree, and my mother would nod approvingly while asking endless questions about what she bought or where she went. Eventually, the conversation would drift toward me. Not with excitement, but with mild curiosity. "So, how's your little job going?" my mom would ask. The word little always hung in the air longer than the rest of the sentence. "It's going well," I would reply with a small smile. "I just finished a big project for a client." My dad would nod politely before changing the subject. It wasn't openly cruel. No one ever yelled at me or insulted me directly, but the difference in how we were treated was impossible to ignore. Praise from my siblings came easily and loudly, while anything I did was met with quiet acknowledgement at best. For a long time, I told myself I was imagining it. Families weren't perfect. Parents showed love in different ways. Maybe Daniel just happened to be doing exciting things. Maybe Lily was easier to celebrate. I convinced myself that if I kept showing up, kept being supportive, and kept proving that I was responsible and hardworking, eventually they would see me the same way they saw my siblings. But someone else noticed the pattern much sooner than I did. My husband, Mark. Mark wasn't the kind of person who spoke just to fill silence. He was observant, thoughtful, and incredibly calm in situations that would make most people uncomfortable. The first time he came to dinner with my family, he barely said anything the whole evening. At the time, I thought he was just shy. Later that night, while we were driving home, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Does your family always talk about money that much?" I shrugged. "I guess. It's just normal conversation for them." Mark glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "It feels more like a competition." I laughed softly. "They're not competing with me. I'm not even in the same field as Daniel." Mark didn't respond right away, and the silence stretched for a moment. Over the next few months, he came with me to several more family dinners. Each time, I noticed him quietly watching everything. The way my parents praised Daniel for every new investment. The way Lily's lifestyle was treated like something impressive rather than irresponsible. And the way conversations about me always seemed shorter. One evening after dinner at my parents' house, Mark and I sat in the car before driving home. The windows were fogging slightly from the cold outside, and the streetlights cast soft yellow reflections across the windshield. Mark turned toward me with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "What do you think would happen if you told your family you lost all your money?" I blinked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Like if you told them you and I were struggling financially, that you lost your savings or something." I laughed immediately. "They'd help me, obviously." Mark didn't laugh with me. Instead, he watched me with the same calm expression. "I'm not so sure about that." His answer surprised me enough that I stopped smiling. "What makes you say that?" He hesitated for a second, choosing his words carefully. "Because every time we're with them, they measure people by what they have." "That's not true," I said quickly, though my voice sounded less certain than I expected. Mark rested one hand on the steering wheel. "I'm not saying they don't love you," he said gently, "but I do think their respect is tied to success." I stared out the window, watching a neighbor's porch light flicker on across the street. "I think you're overthinking it," I said quietly. "Maybe," Mark replied. He didn't push the conversation any further that night, but the idea he planted stayed in my mind longer than I wanted to admit. Over the next few days, I found myself replaying past conversations with my parents and siblings. The jokes about money, the subtle comparisons, the way financial success seemed to be the topic that excited everyone the most. The more I thought about it, the harder it became to ignore the pattern. 1 week later, my parents invited us over for another Sunday dinner. As I got ready that evening, Mark leaned against the bedroom doorframe and watched me. "You look nervous," he said. "I'm not nervous," I replied, adjusting my earrings. He tilted his head slightly. "Thinking about what we talked about?" I sighed. "Maybe." Mark walked over and gently squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with." I looked at him for a moment, considering everything. Then I took a deep breath. "No," I said slowly. "I think I want to know." Mark nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. Later that evening, we sat around the dining table at my parents' house. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room, and my father poured drinks, while Daniel talked about another investment opportunity he was excited about. The conversation flowed the way it always did, until halfway through dinner, when I quietly set my fork down. My heart started beating faster. I looked around the table at my family, the people I had spent my whole life trying to impress. Then I took a breath and spoke. "There's actually something I need to tell you all," I said. The table grew quiet. Mark and I lost most of our savings. For a moment, no one spoke. Then everything changed. For a moment after I spoke, the entire table seemed frozen in place. My words hung in the air like something fragile that might shatter if anyone touched it. I had expected concern, maybe questions, at the very least, some kind of emotional reaction. Instead, the silence felt heavy and uncomfortable. My mother was the first to move. She slowly set her fork down and sighed in a way that sounded more annoyed than worried. "Oh, that's unfortunate," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel exactly, but it definitely wasn't sympathetic either. It sounded more like someone reacting to bad weather than to their daughter sharing serious news. My father leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me with narrowed eyes. "What happened?" he asked. I had already planned my answer in the car on the way over. "We made some investments that didn't work out," I said quietly. "And then a project I was counting on fell through. It just snowballed." Daniel let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh before quickly covering it with a cough. "Risky investments?" he asked, raising one eyebrow. "Something like that," I replied. He shook his head slowly, the way someone does when they believe they're watching a predictable mistake unfold. "You always have to be careful with that stuff," he said. "The market isn't for amateurs." The word amateurs stung more than I expected. Across the table, Lily leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "How much did you lose?" she asked. The question came out so bluntly that it made my stomach tighten. "Most of our savings," I said. Her eyes widened slightly, but not in the way I hoped. "Wow," she said. "That's really bad." I waited for someone to ask if we were okay. No one did. My mom reached for her glass of water and took a slow sip before speaking again. "Well," she said, "you shouldn't expect us to bail you out." Her words hit the table like a dropped plate. For a second, I wondered if I had misunderstood her. "I wasn't asking you to," I replied softly. My father folded his arms across his chest. "You know," he said, "this is exactly why we always worried about you." I blinked. "Worried about me?" "You've always been a little careless with long-term planning," he continued. "Not like Daniel." Daniel didn't say anything, but he didn't look uncomfortable either. If anything, he looked slightly satisfied. Mark sat beside me quietly, his posture relaxed, his face neutral. Anyone watching might have thought he wasn't paying attention, but I knew him well enough to see that he was observing every word. Lily tapped her fingers lightly against the table. "So what are you guys going to do now?" she asked. "We'll figure it out," I said. My mom tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You might have to make some lifestyle changes," she said carefully. "Cut unnecessary expenses." I almost laughed at the irony. My life had always been the least extravagant one at the table. Daniel drove a luxury car that cost more than my annual rent. Lily carried a designer bag that probably cost 3 months of groceries. But suddenly, I was the one who needed a lecture about financial responsibility. My dad cleared his throat. "Are you still renting that apartment downtown?" he asked. "Yes." He frowned. "That area is expensive. Maybe it's time to move somewhere cheaper." Before I could answer, Lily added something that made the room feel even colder. "Well, you should probably stop coming to family vacations, too." Everyone turned toward her. "What?" my mom asked. Lily shrugged casually. "I'm just saying, those trips are expensive. If they're struggling, it probably makes more sense for them to sit those out." She said it so casually, like she was suggesting someone skip dessert. My chest tightened. I had gone from daughter to financial liability in less than 10 minutes. My mom didn't correct her. Instead, she gave a small nod. "That might be wise," she said. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You know, this is why diversification matters," he added. "You can't just throw money into random projects and hope they work." "I didn't," I said quietly. But he kept going. "If you'd asked me before investing, I could have warned you." The conversation slowly shifted away from concern and toward analysis, like my financial loss was an interesting case study rather than something happening to someone they supposedly loved. Daniel began explaining market trends. My dad nodded along thoughtfully. Lily started scrolling through her phone again. No one asked if we needed help. No one asked if we were scared. No one asked how we were going to manage. It was like my announcement had simply confirmed something they already believed about me, that I was the least capable member of the family. After another few minutes, my mom finally looked back at me. "Well," she said, "I hope this is a lesson." "A lesson?" I repeated. "Yes," she said calmly. "Life teaches responsibility in difficult ways sometimes." I glanced at Mark. He hadn't spoken once since I told them, but now I noticed something in his expression. Not anger, not surprise, just quiet confirmation, like someone watching a prediction unfold exactly as expected. Dinner continued awkwardly after that. Daniel kept talking about real estate. Lily described a vacation she and her boyfriend were planning in Europe. My parents listened with enthusiasm. The earlier conversation about my situation, already fading from their attention. No one brought it up again. By the time we finished dessert, I felt like a guest who had overstayed their welcome. When Mark and I stood up to leave, my mom hugged me quickly. "Take care of yourself," she said. There was no warmth in it, just polite distance. My dad gave Mark a firm handshake. "Good luck," he said. It sounded less like encouragement and more like dismissal. Daniel nodded at us briefly. "Hope things turn around," he said. Lily barely looked up from her phone. "Bye," she muttered. The cold night air outside felt strangely refreshing after the tension inside the house. We walked to the car in silence. As soon as the doors closed, I exhaled slowly, like I had been holding my breath for the past hour. Mark started the engine, but didn't drive yet. "Well?" he said gently. I stared out the window at my parents' house. The warm lights inside made it look welcoming from the outside. But I knew better now. "They didn't even ask if we were okay," I said quietly. Mark rested one hand on the steering wheel. "I know." I felt a lump forming in my throat. They didn't offer help. They didn't even pretend to care. Mark turned toward me slightly. "Because in their minds," he said softly, "you stopped being valuable the moment you stopped being successful." His words hurt, but they also explained everything that had just happened. I wiped a tear from my cheek. "I really thought they loved me." Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm sure they believe they do," he said. "But what they showed tonight, that's something different." I took a long breath, trying to process the realization slowly settling in my chest. Then, I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since dinner started. "You already knew this would happen, didn't you?" Mark didn't deny it. He simply nodded once. "Yes." The quiet certainty in his voice made something inside me shift. For the first time, I realized something painful. The man who had married into my family understood them better than I did, and the worst part was, he had been right all along. After that dinner, something invisible shifted between me and my family. It wasn't dramatic. There were no angry phone calls or emotional confrontations. Instead, it was a quiet withdrawal that slowly made the distance between us feel wider every day. At first, I expected someone to reach out. My mom usually called at least once a week to talk about random things, recipes she was trying, neighborhood gossip, or updates about Lily's latest plans. But that week, my phone stayed silent. I told myself she was probably busy. The second week passed, then the third. Still, nothing. My dad hadn't been much of a caller even before, but he usually sent short messages occasionally, links to articles about business or investments. After that dinner, even those stopped. The family group chat was the strangest part. Before, it had always been full of small conversations and photos. Lily posting pictures from brunch, my mom sharing holiday ideas, Daniel occasionally bragging about a deal he had closed. But when I typed something, the responses suddenly became slow or non-existent. One evening, I sent a simple message. "Hope everyone's having a good week." Daniel read it. Lily read it. My parents read it. No one replied. At first, I thought maybe they had missed it. The next day, Lily posted a photo of herself at a cafe with her boyfriend. My mom immediately commented with heart emojis. Daniel wrote, "Looks fancy." I stared at the screen, realizing something uncomfortable. They hadn't missed my message. They had ignored it. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did, but it felt like being slowly erased. Mark noticed the change before I mentioned it. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie when he paused the TV and looked at me. "You've been checking your phone a lot tonight," he said. I glanced down at the screen again before putting it face down on the table. "Just waiting for a message," I replied. "From your family?" I nodded. Mark didn't say, "I told you so." He wasn't that kind of person. Instead, he leaned back against the couch. Has anyone reached out since that dinner? I hesitated. No. He studied my face for a moment. How does that make you feel? I thought about the answer longer than I expected. Confused, I said finally. And embarrassed. Embarrassed? I sighed, like I failed some kind of test. Mark's expression softened slightly. You didn't fail anything, he said. But the feeling didn't disappear easily. Over the next few weeks, the distance became even clearer. Daniel stopped inviting us to family gatherings. I only realized it because my mom posted photos afterward. One picture showed everyone sitting around a long dining table at a restaurant. Daniel, Lily, my parents, even Lily's boyfriend. The caption read, "Family Dinner Night." I stared at the photo longer than I should have. Mark walked into the room and noticed the look on my face. "What happened?" he asked. I turned the phone toward him. He looked at the photo quietly. "They didn't invite us," I said. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat down beside me. "That hurts," he admitted. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." For the next few days, I kept expecting someone to explain. Maybe they thought we were busy. Maybe it had been a last-minute plan. But no explanation ever came. Then Christmas approached. Normally, my mom planned the holiday weeks in advance. She loved decorating the house, organizing big dinners, and making sure everyone attended. That year, the invitation never arrived. Instead, a few days before Christmas, Lily sent me a short message. "Hey, maybe skip gifts this year since you're struggling." I stared at the text in disbelief. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Do you want to come over?" Just a reminder not to bring presents. I showed the message to Mark. He read it carefully before handing the phone back to me. "That's very direct," he said. "That's one way to describe it." "What are you going to do?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Nothing," I said. And surprisingly, that answer felt right. Instead of spending Christmas with my family that year, Mark and I stayed home. We cooked dinner together, watched movies, and opened a few small gifts. It was quiet, simple, and strangely peaceful. A few weeks later, something even more surprising happened. I realized I was happier. Without the constant comparisons and subtle judgments at family gatherings, my mind felt lighter. I wasn't constantly wondering if I had said something impressive enough or shared the right kind of update. I was just living. One evening, Mark noticed it too. We were cooking dinner together when he looked over at me and smiled. "You've been laughing more lately," he said. Curious. "Have I?" "Yes." I stirred the pasta sauce thoughtfully. "I guess I feel less pressure." "That makes sense." "For the first time," I admitted. "I don't feel like I'm competing with anyone." Sighs. Mark leaned against the kitchen counter. "You never were," he said. But my family had always made it feel that way. The biggest irony of the whole situation was something they didn't know. We hadn't actually lost our money, not even close. The story about losing our savings had been completely false. In reality, the exact opposite had happened. Surprised. A few months earlier, Mark had quietly sold a large portion of the shares he owned from a tech company he had helped build years ago. It wasn't something he liked to brag about, so he rarely mentioned it. But the sale had been extremely successful. Our financial advisor had called us a week after it went through. "Congratulations," he said. "Your net worth has officially passed 3 million." I remembered looking at Mark in shock. 3 million? I repeated. He shrugged casually. "Looks like it." We hadn't changed our lifestyle much after that. We were comfortable before, and we were comfortable afterward. But the money gave us freedom. Freedom to choose how we spent our time. Freedom to help others when we wanted. And, as it turned out, freedom to test something important. One night, While we were sitting on the balcony watching the city lights, I asked Mark a question that had been lingering in my mind. Why did you suggest the test in the first place? He thought about it for a moment. Because I noticed something during every dinner with your family. What? They were always most interested in people who had something to offer them. I leaned back in my chair. So you wanted to see if they would treat me differently if they thought I had nothing? Yes. And now we know the answer. Mark nodded slowly. They showed their true priorities. About 6 months after that dinner, something unexpected finally happened. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom. Family reunion dinner next weekend. Everyone will be there. I stared at the message. It was the first time she had contacted me in months. Then another message appeared. Please don't discuss financial problems at the table. I read the line twice before showing the phone to Mark. He leaned over to look at the screen. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed. Not loudly, but enough to make the moment feel lighter. Oh, he said. What? I asked. He leaned back in his chair with a small smile. We're definitely going. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Mark's expression turned calm and thoughtful again. Because sometimes, he said, people deserve to see the results of their own test. And judging by the look in his eyes, he already knew exactly how that dinner was going to end. The night of the reunion dinner arrived faster than I expected. For most of the week, I had tried not to think about it too much. But as Mark and I drove toward the restaurant, the familiar knot of anxiety began forming in my stomach. It wasn't the place that made me nervous. The restaurant was one of those upscale spots my family loved. Dim lighting, polished marble floors, and servers who moved around quietly like they were part of the decor. My parents had always believed environments like that reflected success. It was the people waiting inside that made my chest feel tight. Mark noticed the way I was staring out the car window. Nervous? He asked gently. A little, I admitted. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Remember, he said calmly, you don't owe anyone anything tonight. I nodded, taking a slow breath. The moment we stepped inside the restaurant, I spotted them immediately. My parents had chosen a long table near the back, where the lighting was warm and the view overlooked the city through tall windows. Everyone was already seated. Daniel sat at one end of the table, leaning back comfortably while talking to my dad. Lily sat across from him, scrolling through her phone while occasionally chiming into the conversation. My mom was in the middle, smiling and nodding at everything Daniel said. For a brief moment, I felt like I was watching a scene from outside the family rather than walking back into it. Then my mom noticed us. Her smile stiffened slightly. Oh, she said, standing up halfway from her chair. You made it. The way she said it made it sound like she hadn't been completely sure we would. Hi, Mom, I replied. She gave me a quick hug. It was polite, but there was none of the warmth I remembered from years ago. My dad shook Mark's hand. Good to see you, he said. Daniel gave us a short nod. Hey. Lily glanced up from her phone and waved casually. Hi. That was it. No questions about how we had been. No curiosity about why we hadn't seen each other in months. Just polite acknowledgement. Mark pulled out a chair for me, and we sat down. I immediately noticed something else about the table. Everyone was dressed to impress. Daniel wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Lily had a designer handbag placed carefully beside her chair. My mom had on a necklace I recognized from a luxury jewelry brand she loved to mention. Even my dad's watch looked new. The whole scene felt like a quiet competition of wealth. A server came by to pour water and take drink orders. As the glasses were filled and menus passed around, the conversation picked up right where it had apparently left off before we arrived. Daniel was in the middle of describing another real estate investment. "I'm telling you," he said confidently, "this property is going to double in value within 5 years." My dad nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of smart move I like to see." My mom smiled proudly at him. "You've always had a good head for business." Lily leaned forward slightly. "Did you see that penthouse listing I sent you?" she asked Daniel. "Yes," he said. "Way overpriced." She shrugged. "I still want to see it." No one asked Mark or me what we had been doing lately. At first, I wondered if they were avoiding the topic on purpose. Maybe they felt uncomfortable bringing up money after what had happened months earlier. But the more I listened, the more obvious it became that they simply weren't interested. Halfway through dinner, the conversation shifted toward investments and financial planning. Daniel was explaining something about rental income when he suddenly looked toward Mark and me. "So," he said casually, "what have you guys been up to lately?" The table grew a little quieter. I glanced at Mark. He met my eyes and gave a small nod. The signal was subtle, but I understood exactly what it meant. I turned back to the table. "Actually," I said calmly, "we've been doing pretty well." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I thought you said you lost everything," he said. Mark placed his elbows lightly on the table. "Oh," he said calmly. "That wasn't exactly the full story." My mom frowned. "What do you mean?" Mark looked around the table before speaking again. "It was more of an experiment." The word hung in the air. Daniel blinked. "An experiment?" "Yes," Mark replied. My dad's expression turned confused. "What kind of experiment?" I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "To see how people would react," I said. Lily let out a small laugh. "React to what?" "To thinking we had nothing left." The room grew noticeably quieter. I unlocked my phone and opened the financial dashboard our advisor had set up for us. The screen showed a clear overview of our accounts, investments, and assets. Then I slowly turned the phone so everyone at the table could see it. For a moment, no one moved. The number at the bottom of the screen was large and impossible to miss. 32,413,000. My mom's fork slipped from her hand and clattered softly against her plate. My dad leaned closer to the screen, squinting slightly. Daniel's confident expression faded. Lily's mouth actually fell open. No one spoke. Mark finally broke the silence. "We wanted to see something," he said calmly. Daniel looked up at him. "What?" Mark's voice stayed steady. "Who would still treat her like family if she had nothing to offer?" The words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. My mom looked from the phone to my face. "You lied to us?" she said slowly. "It wasn't about lying," I replied. "It was about learning." My dad sat back in his chair, still staring at the number. "That can't be right," he muttered. Mark smiled slightly. "It is." Daniel cleared his throat. "Well, congratulations," he said, though the confidence in his voice had clearly weakened. Lily leaned forward, suddenly. "Wait," she said. "How did this happen?" Mark answered simply. "I sold some company shares earlier this year." My mom looked stunned. "You never mentioned that." Mark shrugged lightly. "No one asked." The table fell quiet again. But the silence this time felt very different, because everyone sitting there knew exactly what had happened months earlier. And more importantly, they knew exactly how they had treated me when they believed I had nothing. For several seconds after Mark finished speaking, no one at the table moved. The soft noise of the restaurant continued around us, dishes clinking, quiet conversations, a waiter passing by with a tray of drinks. But at our table, everything felt frozen. My phone was still resting on the table, the screen glowing with the number that had stunned everyone into silence. $3 million. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about what that number had revealed. My mother was the first to recover. She forced a small laugh that sounded strained and unnatural. "Oh, sweetheart," she said quickly, reaching for her water glass. "You must have misunderstood us before." I didn't respond. I simply watched her. She continued speaking, her voice suddenly softer and warmer than it had been in months. "We were just worried about you," she added. "You know how parents are." My father nodded immediately, eager to support the explanation. "That's right," he said. "We were trying to teach you responsibility." The words would have sounded convincing if they hadn't come after months of silence. Daniel leaned forward in his chair, his earlier confidence slowly returning now that the situation looked different. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I have to say that's impressive." His eyes flicked briefly toward the number on my phone again. 3 million isn't bad at all. Lily, who had been staring at the screen like it might disappear if she blinked, suddenly leaned closer to me. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with curiosity now instead of distance. "What kind of investments are those?" Mark leaned back in his chair calmly. "Mostly tech stocks and some private equity," he replied. Lily's eyes lit up. "That's amazing," she said quickly. "You should tell me about them sometime." The sudden shift in her tone was almost dizzying. 6 months ago, she had told me I should probably stop coming to family vacations because I couldn't afford them. Now she sounded like she wanted financial advice. My mom reached across the table and lightly touched my arm. "I'm just glad everything worked out," she said warmly. I looked down at her hand resting on my sleeve. It felt strange, not comforting, just unfamiliar. Because the truth was, I had spent most of my life waiting for this moment, waiting for my parents to look at me with the same pride they showed my siblings, waiting for them to see me as successful, valuable, worthy. But sitting there now with proof of success glowing on a phone screen in front of me, something inside me had already changed. The approval I had once wanted so badly didn't feel important anymore. Daniel was already pulling his chair closer. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if you're looking for new investment opportunities, I've been working on a few projects." I almost smiled. The shift was so obvious it was almost predictable. My dad leaned forward too. "Actually," he said, "I've been thinking about expanding a small business idea." Lily chimed in immediately. "And I've been wanting to get into real estate." The energy at the table had completely transformed. 6 months ago, I had been the family disappointment. Now, I was suddenly the most interesting person in the room. Mark noticed it too. I could see it in the calm way he watched the conversation unfold. He didn't interrupt them. He didn't criticize them. He simply observed. Finally, my mom squeezed my arm again. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "why didn't you tell us sooner?" I looked at her. "Tell you what?" "That you were doing so well," she replied. The question hung between us for a moment. Then I answered, honestly. "Because I wanted to see who would still care about me if I wasn't." No one at the table spoke. Daniel leaned back again, his expression tightening slightly. "Well," he said after a moment, "you didn't exactly give us the full story." "That was the point," Mark said calmly. My father frowned. "So this whole thing was just a test?" I nodded. "Yes." Lily crossed her arms. "That's kind of unfair." I almost laughed. Unfair. That word sounded strange coming from someone who had dismissed me so easily months earlier. But I didn't argue. Instead, I looked around the table slowly, at the people I had spent years trying to impress, at the family whose approval had once meant everything to me. And for the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. Not as heroes, not as role models, just as people. Flawed, selfish, complicated people. My mom broke the silence again. Well, she said with a hopeful smile, now that everything's out in the open, we can move forward. The words were meant to sound reassuring, but something about them felt hollow, because moving forward would mean pretending the last 6 months had never happened, pretending they hadn't ignored my messages, pretending they hadn't excluded me from dinners and holidays, pretending Lily hadn't suggested I stop coming to family vacations, pretending none of it mattered. But it did matter. It mattered more than they seemed to realize. I gently picked up my phone from the table and slipped it back into my bag. Then I stood up. The movement caught everyone off guard. "You're leaving?" my mom asked. I nodded. "Yes. But dinner isn't finished," she said. "I know." My father looked confused. "Then why are you going?" I hesitated for just a second, choosing my words carefully. "Because now I understand something." The table stayed silent. I looked at my mom first. "I might lose money someday," I said calmly. Then I glanced at my dad. "Investments fail." Finally, my eyes moved to Daniel and Lily. "Businesses collapse." They all listened quietly. "But when I told you I had nothing," I continued softly, "you showed me something much worse." My mom's hopeful expression slowly faded. "What do you mean?" she asked. I took a small breath. "You showed me how easily you could lose me." No one had an answer for that. Mark stood up beside me, placing a supportive hand gently against my back. "Thank you for dinner," he said politely. The words were simple, calm, but they felt final. As we walked away from the table, no one tried to stop us. The restaurant doors closed quietly behind us, and the cool night air wrapped around us like a breath of fresh air. For a moment, neither of us spoke as we walked toward the car. Then Mark glanced at me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. For years, I had imagined confronting my family in some dramatic moment. I thought there would be shouting or tears or some kind of emotional explosion. But instead, what I felt was something much simpler. Peace. "I feel free," I said. Mark smiled slightly as he unlocked the car. "Worth the test?" he asked. I looked back once toward the glowing windows of the restaurant where my family was still sitting. Then I turned away. "Absolutely. Because sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge, it's clarity. It's finally seeing people for who they truly are. And once you know your worth, you stop waiting for anyone else to recognize it."